ranking every Misfits boxing event. I thought now was a pretty good time to do this because we just finished up with the last Misfits event of 2023. Originally, I was going to do a Misfits 2023 ranking list, but then I decided I might as well just do every single event they've done. One thing I will say is this was a lot harder than I initially thought it would be. A lot of them were really close in my eyes. Some had higher highs, but also had some low points. So it was kind of hard to pick which card is going where, but I feel confident about where I ended up. We got 11 events to go through. We're going to try to do this quickly. Let's start off with number 11, not the event, but 11 in my rankings, Misfits 008. And I'll say that the main reason this card is here is because of the difficulties it went through. There was a lot of last minute replacements, guys dropping out, trying to get this card together at all. And I'll say they did a good job of at least putting it on, but there was just a lack of fights, not too much to watch. And of those fights we got, a lot of them were tag team or the new Survivor tag, which was entertaining, but I would have liked to see more one-on-one matchups. My highlights of the card was the tag team match with Dean the Great and Waleed on the same team. I thought it did a great job of building up their fight for the Prime card. And at the end of the day, I had fun with the Survivor tag idea. Maybe not as a main event. And I think they had some things to work out. I think if we see it again, it will be better. But for the first time around, it was fun. But it definitely had its problems. Nick Lamau had a great showing there. But there was just a lack of substance to this card. Let's move on. With the 10th best Misfits event, or worst, depending on how you see it, I got Misfits 006. And here's what I'm going to say about this one. I think it had a lot of decent to solid events. There weren't many low points on the card, but it was lacking the high points, if that's a thing. I think that's a thing. There was no one fight that really got us hooked. I did enjoy the main event between JMX and Le'Veon Bell. I like watching both guys fight. I want to see them both on Misfits again. I liked watching the Minicon versus Jake the Viking fight. Chris Avila versus Paul Bamba was pretty interesting. This card introduced a lot of new faces that we have since seen again. I didn't really dislike any of the fights, but I didn't really love them either. And that's why I have it at number 10. Let's move on to number 9, Misfits 002. I think what hurt this event the most was the mismatch of the main event. We had Jay Swingler versus Charities. Charities had no business being in the ring with him. I get they were trying to reintroduce Jay Swingler to the scene, build him up, but this was just too much of a mismatch in my eyes. It wasn't great to watch, especially as a main event. That's what the people are coming to see. We also had another mismatch with the JMX versus Ginty fight. Ginty technically had a knockdown, but it didn't really hurt him at all and didn't really do anything for the fight. Kind of a similar situation to that main event. They were trying to build up JMX, but too much of a mismatch in my eyes. Ginty, not very good. Highlight for the event, probably Slim versus Ryan Taylor. Not the most competitive fight. That seems to be the case for this event. But Ryan Taylor showed a lot of toughness, stayed in there. There were some nasty shots landed, some knockdowns, which ultimately put it above the events below this one. But I would have liked to see some more competitive fights overall. Moving on to the 8th best Misfits card. We got a recent card, just went down actually, Misfits number 11. For some reason, there was a lot of old men on this card. 2 guys in their 50s, and they both got finished in either the first or second round. Please retire. But aside from those old man prelims, I thought this card was pretty entertaining. I liked watching the main event, Jarvis versus B-Dave. Again, not the most competitive, but it wasn't like that Jay Swingler versus Charities fight. B-Dave did a lot better job of at least staying in there, landing some shots of his own, and just when you thought Jarvis was going to put him away, he would land something. I also think it did a great job of building up Jarvis for the future. Misfits sees a lot of potential in him, and I see why. I'm really impressed with Jarvis from a technical aspect. I'm really excited to see what's next for him. Other highlights, I enjoyed the OJ Rose versus Gabriel Silva fight. Both guys very talented, and I'm sure we're going to see both of them back on Misfits. Gabriel Silva should be fighting AT for the belt next. Julie Polka versus Elena Vampira. Awesome fight to watch. Julie Polka may be the #1 pound for pound female influencer boxer. There were some heavy shots landed in that fight. Elena Vampira never gave up when a lot of people in her situation would have. We also had a really interesting one with Arms versus Minicon 2. Both guys gassing out. Arms wins the fight, even though he was about to pass out. I thought he was gonna towards the end of that fight. Pretty concerning there, but overall, I had a lot of fun with it. Let's move on. For the 7th best Misfits event, I got Misfits number 5. We had another Jay Swingler main event, but this time a lot more competitive. Jay Swingler versus Nick Lamau. The introduction of Nick Lamau, and I really like watching him fight. He shocked a ton of people in this main event, and it was really great to see. I know a lot of people thought that he won the fight, even though the decision went to Jay here. So that was a fun fight. We had the big upset with Ashley Roxu taking the win over King Kenny. That kind of ignited King Kenny to take it to another gear. Ashley Roxu, man, he works hard. I love that he's in this scene, and he's only going to get better. He's never going to turn down a fight. He wants it with everybody, and I think he's just a great guy to have in this scene. We also had a really fun tag team with B. Dave and Luis Pineda. Pineda really made that tag team. It's always fun when you have Pineda on a card. One of the better tag teams we've seen. The only thing that was absolutely horrible about this card was Ginty versus Halal Ham. And that brings this card down a little bit. Actually, that fight is the worst fight we've ever seen on Misfits. Very boring. I don't really have anything positive to say about it. So let's just move on from that one. Dean the Great was in the co-main event for this one. We've seen how much he's been built up throughout his career on Misfits. That was a fun fight to watch. So aside from that really boring fight, I thought this card was very solid. It had some competitive fights, some fun finishes, and that's why I got it where it is. We're slowly getting there. Number 6 for the best Misfits event is Misfits 009. We had an awesome fight with OJ Rose. We had a first round finish by Arms. That was a very fun fight to watch. It sucked for Master Uguay getting knocked out in round 1, but it was an awesome fight. We got our introduction to Gabriel Silva, mismatch fight with Ben Davis, but it was a last minute replacement, and I thought the build up for that fight was fun. We had a great performance by Ashley Roxu, building him up even more. We had the return of Face Temper, a nice finish for him against Ginty, and a very competitive back and forth fight between Idris Virgo versus Aaron Chalmers. That was a main event I wasn't really looking forward to, but the fight itself actually exceeded my expectations, so that was nice to see. I thought this was an underrated card. I feel like it's not appreciated enough. It had some solid names on it, very competitive fights, and yeah, I just thought this was a little underrated. But now let's move on to our number 5 spot, our first KSI main event on this list, not his first return fight. I got Misfits 007. Virus had an awesome knockout against DK Money. Kinda not great to look back at now since he got popped for using steroids. That sucks for DK Money because he was having a great performance and then got one-shotted. But at the time, it was a great knockout. We had Salt Poppy versus Anthony Taylor. A little bit disappointing, let's be honest. Kind of a snooze fest a little bit, but I still always like watching Salt Poppy fight. Anthony Taylor got the decision. And then I had a lot of fun watching Deji versus Swarms. I think Swarms has been a great addition to Misfits. I think he's a lot of fun. Deji's someone that a lot of this scene is always going to root for. He gets a nice dub here. I thought that was a really fun co-main event. And then we have the fight that kind of hurts this card a little bit, and that's KSI versus Joe Fournier. And that is because of the elbow that knocked out Joe. Kind of an anticlimactic finish because of that elbow. You could tell an awesome finish was about to come anyway, and it was gonna be awesome to see. KSI was very much in control of that fight. We all knew what was coming. But then the elbow was what landed. It knocked him out. And it kind of just left a weird feeling on the card to end it, which is why I might have it a little lower, especially for a KSI main event. But that is why. And I think a lot of people felt that way as well. And now for my number 4 spot on my Misfits rankings, the best non-KSI main event. Misfits number 3, Dean the Great versus Waleed Sharks. main event fight. It's been cool to see how far these guys have come since this event, but man, this main event was awesome to watch. Waleed Sharks winning most of the fight, looking like it's going to be a dominant victory, then Dean the Great lands that nasty right hand and finishes the fight out of nowhere. We also had a pretty funny fight between Josh Bruckner and Chase D'Amore, this classic Chase D'Amore moment right here that I love to see. We had a nice finish by King Kenny, a nice finish by FaZe Temper, a wild fight between Greg Hardy and Hasim Rahman Jr. There were some nice finishes that may not have been super competitive, but we also got those really competitive fights as well. It was a nice mix of things, and that's why I got it at the number 4 spot. This number 3 one I have on my list, this card at the time was so exciting to watch, and that was the return of KSI, the very first Misfits event, Misfits number 1. We had KSI in the 2 fights one night, beating Pineda and Swarms. I think that's why I have it at 3 instead of 2, is because those fights weren't very competitive. It was still awesome to see KSI back in the ring, but the fights themselves were just okay. We had an awesome Dean the Great finish. We had an awesome Salt Poppy finish. Kenny versus FaZe Sensei. It kind of sucked that FaZe Sensei got robbed in that fight, but it was still a nice fight to see. We got to see Deji get his first win against Fusi. Everyone was so hyped to see that happen. Bro finally got his first win. And then we had that insane, one of my favorite Misfits knockouts, the Slim versus FaZe Temper knockout. So many people were underestimating Slim in that fight. I saw most predictions were going to FaZe Temper. I think I even predicted Temper to win that one. And that really introduced Slim to this scene. And we've seen how far he's come since that. That was one of the best KOs we've seen yet. This was a great card and a great introduction to Misfits. For my number 2 overall Misfits event, I kept going back and forth between this and the number 1 I have. I got Misfits 004. This is probably my favorite KSI fight. Lands that insane round 1 knockout against FaZe Temper. I know I just stopped talking about a FaZe Temper knockout, and now I'm doing it again. We've always heard about that crazy KSI knockout power, and we finally got to see it on display here. We had my favorite Salt Poppy performance. Salt Poppy versus Josh Bruckner. Insane knockout there. Slim versus Tom Zanetti. That was a back and forth fight. Tom Zanetti did way better than a lot of people thought he would. We had the mystery opponent, Luis Pineda, coming in against B-Dave. It's fun to root for Pineda in these fights. It was great to see him bounce back after that KSI performance. And it was just great to see him get a win on this event. There was a quick but great fight between Elle Brooke and Faith Ordway. Both girls landing some heavy shots. Elle Brooke gets the early finish. And then, of course, we had One Punch Man Swarms finish Ryan Taylor with just one punch. This card had a lot of highs and not many lows. Some of the best knockouts we've seen on Misfits, and that's why I have it as the second best Misfits event. And I think now, of course, we all know what my number 1 card is. It wasn't automatic. I actually was going back and forth about it, but I did end up putting the Prime card as the best Misfits event. The build up to this card was unlike anything we've seen in the space before. Of course, everyone remembers the Dylan Dennis and Logan Paul back and forth build up to their fight. We finally got to see KSI going up against a very competitive opponent, someone that made the fans doubt he could win. I feel like KSI in his last few fights before this one was a heavy favorite, and now we finally got to see him as the underdog again. I know a lot of people were saying they were disappointed with the co-main and main event themselves, but in the moment, I had a ton of fun watching that KSI versus Tommy Fury fight just because I was so invested and I thought it was competitive. In hindsight, it's kind of an ugly fight to watch, but I think just how big that moment was, it still makes me appreciate that that fight happened and the significance of that fight. Same with the Logan Paul one. It was a big return. We finally got to see the ending to this story between him and Dylan Dennis. Everyone wanted to know if Dylan was going to show up, and he did. Again, not the best fight looking back on it, but they were still two huge fights, and in the moment, I had a ton of fun watching them. But aside from those two, there were some awesome fights on the undercard. We had that crazy fight between Salt Poppy and Slim. This one could have been a main event on any other card. Salt Poppy winning most of that fight, Slim starting to come back in the later rounds and finishes Salt Poppy. Two of the more hyped guys in the scene came together and put on this huge fight, and it was great to see. We also had the rematch of one of the best fights we've seen on Misfits, Dean the Great versus Waleed Sharks 2. Dean the Great putting the stamp on this rivalry, but Waleed Sharks had a couple big moments in that fight that kept it really interesting. He even started battling back at the end. Huge performance by Dean the Great. King Kenny versus Anthony Taylor. That one was kind of boring. I don't have much to say about that one. Anthony Taylor, the hug king, came in there and did what he does best. He got those hugs in and went for the decision victory, and I guess he got the job done. We also had what might have been the best tag team we've seen yet, with Nick Lamau and Alex Wasabi versus B-Dave and Luis Pineda. I didn't think this one was going to be very competitive, but it surprised me. This fight was back and forth. The matchups were great. It was competitive all the way through and really entertaining. I even enjoyed the My Mate Nate versus Whindersson Nunes fight. It's been cool to see their improvement throughout their time in this influencer boxing space. This card, in my eyes, met expectations. I think some people were building it up so much in their head that it was a little bit disappointing, especially for a lot of the people that only knew the main and co-main event. I know a lot of people aren't familiar with the names on the undercard, which could have hurt the event in their eyes. But for me, I was invested in a ton of these fights, and a lot of them met or exceeded my expectations, even though that co and main event were a little bit sloppy at times. I loved this card, and I think it deserves the #1 spot as the best Misfits event there is. I know this video has been a little bit of a longer one, but we got there in the end. Those are my full rankings, 11-1, every Misfits event. What do you guys think? Where did I go wrong in these rankings? Let me know. Subscribe for more boxing content and updates. The support is much appreciated. Thank you for watching. Peace.